Elena's eyes fluttered open, and she was greeted by an oppressive silence. The kind of silence that seeped into your bones, making everything feel wrong. The morning light filtered through the gaps in her curtains, casting pale beams across the room, but something was missing. The world outside her apartment window should have been alive with the usual hum, car engines revving, people talking, birds calling from the trees, but all she could hear was the steady rhythm of her own breath. She sat up, rubbing her eyes. Maybe it was just too early. Maybe everyone was still asleep, or it was some kind of citywide holiday. Yet, something deep inside her stirred, an unsettling feeling gnawing at her stomach. She grabbed her phone off the bedside table and unlocked it, expecting to see a slew of notifications. Instead, the screen was blank, no messages, no missed calls, not even a new email. A cold shiver ran down her spine. She opened her contacts and tried dialing her best friend, Lucy. The call went straight to voicemail. Her heart rate quickened as she dialed again, this time her mother's number. Nothing. The same eerie silence from the other end. She felt the weight of the situation slowly settling on her. Something was wrong, and it wasn't just her. Elena stood up, her mind racing. She walked to the window and peered outside, hoping to see some sign of life. But the street was completely deserted. Her eyes scanned the usual morning scene, the corner cafe that should have been bustling with people grabbing their morning coffee, the postman riding his bike along the sidewalk, the children on their way to school, but nothing moved. Not a single soul in sight. She rubbed her temples, trying to shake off the panic creeping into her thoughts. She needed to figure out what was going on, so she grabbed her jacket, quickly slipped on shoes, and left the apartment. The hallway smelled faintly of stale air, a sign that the building hadn't been fully ventilated in a while. A sense of foreboding lingered as she descended the stairs, each step echoing in the silence. The building's lobby was empty, the usual hum of the refrigerator in the corner and the chatter of the doorman absent. Elena hesitated before opening the door. The outside world felt like a different place, one she wasn't ready to face. But there was no choice. She had to know what was happening. As she stepped outside, a chill ran through her, despite the warmth of the sun above. The city was like a ghost town. Abandoned cars lined the streets, their engines long dead. Papers and debris fluttered in the breeze, a strange and unnatural wind. No one was in sight. Not even the faintest sound of distant conversations or radio transmissions filled the air. Her phone buzzed suddenly, breaking the eerie quiet. Elena's heart skipped a beat. It was a message from an unknown number. "Are you the last one left?" A chill swept over her as she read the message. There were no other words, no clues, just those 6 words. The air grew heavier, and Elena's breath caught in her throat. Panic threatened to take over, but she pushed it down. She had to figure this out. She had to know if she was truly alone in the world. With a deep breath, Elena set out, walking aimlessly through the empty streets, hoping to find someone, anyone, who could explain what had happened. But the further she walked, the more her fears grew. There was no sound, no sign of life. Only the silent, oppressive weight of a world that had somehow stopped. And then, she heard it. A soft groan from a shadowy alley. She froze, her body tense, every muscle screaming at her to run. But she couldn't. Something inside her held her in place. Slowly, she turned her head toward the sound, her pulse pounding in her ears. Something was out there. And it was coming for her. Elena's breath hitched as she took a cautious step toward the alley, her eyes scanning the darkened corners. The groan grew louder, followed by a dragging sound, like something heavy, something that shouldn't be able to move without effort. She gripped the strap of her jacket tightly, every muscle in her body wound tight with fear. Her heart was racing, and she had to force herself to breathe slowly, evenly. She couldn't afford to panic. The air was thick with a strange smell now, like rotting food, something decayed. She took another step, just one more, then another. As her footfall echoed in the stillness, the sound from the alley ceased abruptly. The hairs on the back of her neck stood up. The world around her seemed to hold its breath. And then, the figure emerged. It stumbled out from the shadows, its movements jerky and erratic. Elena's stomach churned as she took in the grotesque sight before her. The thing wasn't quite human, not anymore. Its skin was a sickly grayish-blue, stretched taut over bones that seemed to jut out at unnatural angles. A streak of dried blood marred its face, and its eyes were wide, unfocused, yet gleaming with an empty, hungry intensity. It was a zombie. Elena's pulse surged. Her mind screamed for her to run, to turn and flee as far as possible, but her feet felt glued to the ground. The creature's gaze fixed on her, and for a terrifying moment, she thought it was going to charge. She wasn't sure what it would do when it reached her, whether it would tear her apart or just stand there, waiting for her to make the first move. But instead of lunging, it groaned again and took an unsteady step toward her. The stench of decay filled the air, almost suffocating her. Her body shook with a mix of dread and disgust. The slow, methodical way it moved was enough to send chills down her spine. It seemed almost deliberate, but there was nothing in its movements that suggested intelligence. Elena snapped out of her frozen state and took a step back. Another step. And then she broke into a run. Her sneakers hit the cracked pavement as she sprinted, heart thudding painfully in her chest. She didn't dare look behind her, but she could hear the creature dragging itself after her. Its shuffling footsteps were slow, but each one seemed to get closer. The streets were empty, devoid of anything that could offer help or even a place to hide. She turned a corner, pushing herself harder, her breath ragged. Sweat stung her eyes, and she wiped it away quickly. Her body was burning with exertion, but her mind was laser-focused on escaping the creature that was chasing her. Was it the only one? Or was there more? Her thoughts raced faster than her legs could carry her. She'd always heard stories of zombies in movies, books, and games. But none of that mattered now. This was real. This was happening. And she was the one in danger. Elena's eyes darted down the street, and she spotted a narrow alleyway between two buildings just ahead. It was a long shot, but it might give her a place to hide, a place to escape. She turned sharply, her sneakers skidding slightly on the wet ground. She barely registered the dampness of the alley as she entered it, but she knew it was her only chance. She pressed herself into the corner, flattening against the brick wall, trying to steady her breathing. Her heart was pounding in her chest, and her hands trembled. She forced herself to be silent, holding her breath, praying that the zombie wouldn't find her. For a moment, there was nothing. No shuffling, no groaning. Only silence. Elena stayed frozen, her eyes wide, scanning the dark passage ahead. She didn't know how long she waited, but it felt like an eternity. Finally, she heard the sound of dragging footsteps again, closer now, but slower, hesitant. It was still searching for her. She clenched her fists, the reality of her situation sinking in. There was no one coming to save her. No one was left. Just as she thought the creature was about to pass her by, the sound of it stopped. She could feel her breath catching in her throat as the zombie came closer, its movements halting and then resuming, like it was circling her. It sniffed the air, low growls emanating from deep within its throat. Elena's heart nearly stopped when it turned in her direction, and for a split second, their eyes met. Its gaze was blank, devoid of recognition, but there was hunger there, a primal urge. It wasn't just a mindless shell of a person, it was an animal, driven by instinct. And it wanted her. Elena's breath caught in her throat as the creature lurched forward. She acted without thinking, grabbing a loose piece of metal from the ground and swinging it toward its head with all the strength she could muster. The creature let out a harsh, gurgling scream as the metal struck its skull with a sickening crack. It staggered back, groaning, before falling to the ground in a heap. For a moment, everything was still. Elena's heart was pounding in her ears as she stared at the creature's motionless body. She was shaking, her legs weak beneath her. She couldn't believe what had just happened. The weight of the encounter pressed down on her, leaving her breathless and dizzy. She'd survived the first encounter, but she had no idea what the next would be. And for the first time since she'd stepped into this nightmare, Elena knew she couldn't keep running forever. She would have to face whatever horrors lay ahead. But what if there was no one left to fight for? What if she was truly the last one? The question lingered in the air as she turned and ran once more, the feeling of dread gnawing at her with every step. "You said." Elena didn't stop running. She couldn't. Her legs ached, her breath was shallow, but the fear that had settled in her chest urged her forward. Every step felt heavier, each one sinking deeper into the realization that she was utterly alone in a world that had changed overnight. She turned a corner and slowed, scanning the street for any signs of life, or anything that could help her survive. The once bustling city had transformed into a desolate wasteland, the streets littered with discarded items, overturned trash cans, and abandoned vehicles. The towering buildings that had once seemed so imposing now looked empty and hollow, like abandoned shells. There were no shops to hide in, no places to seek shelter, only the quiet, oppressive presence of the dead that might be lurking just around the corner. The silence was suffocating. Elena had never known the city to be this quiet. No distant laughter, no conversations echoing from nearby cafes, no car engines roaring by. It was a different kind of quiet, unnatural. It felt like the world was holding its breath, waiting for something. And maybe, just maybe, that something was her. She staggered toward a nearby convenience store, hoping to find something, anything, that could help her. She reached the door, hesitating for a moment before cautiously pushing it open. The bell above the door jingled weakly, but no one greeted her. Inside, it was dark, the overhead lights flickering dimly, casting eerie shadows across the shelves. The aisles were cluttered with forgotten goods, and the air smelled stale, like it hadn't been touched in days. Her hands shook as she stepped inside, moving carefully down the aisles. She grabbed a few cans of beans from the shelf, a bottle of water, and a bag of chips, anything that might sustain her for a little while. She didn't know how long she'd be on the run, but it felt good to have something in her hands, something that wasn't the weight of fear and confusion. She heard a noise, a soft thud coming from the back of the store. Her body tensed, and she froze, her hands still on the shelf. She strained her ears, listening intently. The noise was repeated, louder this time, followed by a faint groan. Her stomach dropped. She wasn't alone. Instinctively, she ducked down behind a row of shelves, clutching the supplies to her chest. She didn't dare make a sound as she listened to the slow, dragging steps approaching. It was a zombie, she knew it. The sound was unmistakable. It shuffled, dragging its feet across the floor, its groans filling the silence. Elena held her breath, praying that it wouldn't find her, praying it wouldn't smell her fear. The footsteps drew closer, then paused. For a long moment, the only sound in the store was the rasping breath of the creature. Elena could feel her heartbeat in her throat, could feel her pulse pounding in her temples. Every fiber of her being screamed at her to move, to escape, but she couldn't risk it. Not yet. She waited, counting the seconds in her mind. 1, 2, 3. Then, just as she thought she might suffocate from the tension, the footsteps moved away. Slowly, hesitantly, the creature shuffled toward the back of the store, its groans growing fainter with each step. Elena exhaled sharply, her body trembling from the near miss. She was alive. But how long would that last? She waited a few more moments, ensuring the zombie was gone, before standing up and moving swiftly toward the exit. As she stepped outside, the weight of her situation settled upon her once again. The world had become something else, a place where survival wasn't just a matter of finding food and shelter, but of outlasting the horrors lurking at every corner. The first few days had been nothing more than a blur, adrenaline-fueled bursts of survival, a frantic search for food, and an overwhelming need to stay hidden. But now, as she walked through the empty streets, it felt like time had stopped altogether. It was no longer about the noise of life. It was about the absence of it. Her mind flickered to thoughts of the message she'd received the night before. "Are you the last one left?" The question still haunted her. Was she really the last? Or was there hope, other survivors out there, just beyond her reach? A small part of her believed the latter, but she was starting to realize that hope, at this point, was dangerous. It could be what got her killed. The more she held onto it, the more it distracted her from the reality of what she was facing. She couldn't afford to be naive. If there were other survivors, they might not be any better off than she was. She took a deep breath and forced herself to focus on the task at hand. Survival. She needed to keep moving, keep finding shelter, food, and water. But the question lingered: how long would it take before the silence swallowed everything? Before she, too, became a distant memory, a faded echo of a world that no longer existed? As the hours passed, Elena kept moving. She didn't know where she was headed, only that she had to keep moving forward. Every now and then, she would spot a sign, an abandoned building, a shattered window, a door left ajar, but each time she would pause, wondering if the risk was worth it. The danger was always present, always waiting, but the only thing she could do was survive. By the time the sun began to set, casting long shadows over the city, Elena found a small, seemingly abandoned apartment building. The windows were cracked, but the door was locked. She'd been through enough by now to know that being cautious was the only way to stay alive. With a quick glance over her shoulder, she carefully pried open the door and slipped inside, praying that the building wouldn't offer any unwelcome surprises. Inside, the walls were dusty, the air stale, but at least it felt safe. She had found shelter, at least for the night. As she sat against the wall, a can of beans in her hand, Elena's mind drifted again to the message. To the idea that she wasn't truly alone. But she couldn't get distracted. Not now. She had no idea what had happened to the world, and she had no idea how many more dangers lurked out there. She only knew one thing for sure. The silence was closing in. The following morning, Elena woke up to the sounds of the city's usual eerie quiet. She had barely slept the night before, the constant fear that something would find her keeping her awake. The nightmares of the zombies chasing her through dark, empty streets still lingered in her mind, and as she opened her eyes, it took her a moment to remember where she was. The apartment was small, but it was safer than the open streets. She took a deep breath, rubbing her eyes, then scanned the room. Dust hung in the stale air, and the faint light coming through the cracked windows illuminated the small, bare space. A table. A chair. A few dusty shelves. It wasn't much, but it was enough to keep her out of sight for the night. Elena's stomach growled, reminding her that she needed to eat. She'd spent the last couple of days scavenging what she could, trying to find food in the abandoned stores, but supplies were running low. She reached for the small stash of canned beans she had, opening one and eating it cold, not bothering to heat it. Food didn't matter. Surviving did. After finishing, she decided it was time to move again. The city, though empty, still seemed vast, like a labyrinth with no map, every turn leading to more unknowns. But she couldn't keep hiding forever. If there were others alive, she needed to find them. She needed to know she wasn't the last one. Before she left the apartment, she checked the door and the windows, securing everything as best as she could. She wasn't sure what she was hoping for, but she felt the faintest stir of hope. Maybe she wasn't the only one. Maybe there was someone else out there. Elena's instincts urged her to follow the signs, the strange messages she had been receiving. The last one, are you the last one left, haunted her thoughts. She needed to know. She couldn't ignore the possibility that she wasn't the only survivor in this world. As she stepped out into the street, the familiar, silent emptiness greeted her once again. The sun had barely risen, and the light cast long shadows, the city's stark outline stretching across the streets. Elena squinted against the bright sunlight, feeling the weight of solitude pressing down on her shoulders. Her eyes scanned the surroundings, alert to every creak and groan from the city's decaying buildings. She walked for hours, navigating through the empty streets, her eyes constantly searching for any sign of life. Every corner felt like a dead end. Every alleyway seemed more threatening than the last. But then, as she turned a corner, something caught her attention, a flash of movement. It was a figure, barely visible in the distance, moving quickly down an alley. Elena's heart leapt. For a moment, She wasn't sure if it was real or if her mind was playing tricks on her. She stopped, watching, waiting for the figure to reappear. Then it did, stepping out from the shadows. It wasn't a zombie, it was a person. Elena's breath caught in her throat. She wasn't alone. She stepped forward cautiously, her instincts telling her to be careful. The figure didn't notice her right away, but as she drew closer, they stopped and turned to face her. It was a man, tall, his face haggard, his clothes torn and dirty. His eyes were wide with weariness, but there was something else in them, something familiar. He wasn't one of the infected, but there was no sign of a smile or relief at seeing another human. He just stared at her, his body tense, as if waiting for her to make the first move. "Are you alive?" Elena asked, her voice barely above a whisper. She wasn't sure if she was asking him or herself. Was she truly alive in a world that had become so twisted? The man's eyes flickered with something between confusion and fear. Then, slowly, he nodded. "Yeah. I'm alive." Elena felt a rush of relief flood through her, but it was quickly replaced by a gnawing uncertainty. She had no idea who this man was or what he wanted. He could be dangerous. He could be like the others. But she had to know, had to find out if there were more like him. "I'm Elena," she said, keeping her distance. "How long have you been alone?" The man hesitated, glancing around as if checking for threats. "A few weeks. I thought I was the last one." His voice was rough, as if he hadn't used it much in the past days. "I thought I'd gone crazy, seeing things, hearing things. Thought I was losing my mind." Elena nodded. She understood. She felt the same way. "I've been looking for others," she said. "I got a message. Someone asked if I was the last one left." The man's expression darkened, and he glanced around nervously again. "I've heard that too," he muttered. "I thought it was some kind of joke. A sick joke." A chill ran down Elena's spine. They both seemed to be thinking the same thing, that the messages were more than a coincidence, that someone, or something, was watching them. But she couldn't let fear control her now. Not when she had a chance to finally talk to someone else, to get answers. She stepped closer, keeping her voice low. "I think we need to find whoever's sending those messages. They might know something. They might have answers." The man's eyes narrowed, skepticism creeping into his gaze. "Or it could be a trap." Elena nodded, her mind racing. "Yeah, it could be. But what's the alternative? Stay here, alone, in the middle of this mess?" He didn't respond right away, but after a moment, his shoulders sagged, as if the weight of solitude had become too much for him to bear. "I'm not staying here," he said quietly. "Not if there's a chance there are others. Let's go." Elena felt a spark of hope flicker within her. It was small, fragile, but it was enough to keep her moving forward. She wasn't alone anymore. She wasn't the last one left. And that small piece of hope was enough to remind her that maybe, just maybe, there was a future beyond the shadows. The two of them began to walk down the street together, side by side, the uncertainty of the world around them palpable. But for the first time in days, Elena didn't feel entirely alone. And that, she thought, was a glimmer of hope she couldn't ignore. Elena and the man, whose name turned out to be Caleb, moved cautiously through the streets. They didn't speak much at first, both of them too aware of the danger lurking around every corner. Caleb, though seemingly tough, was visibly drained, his movements slow and calculated. Elena could tell he hadn't been surviving in this chaos for as long as she had, but there was something about him that made her feel a bit less alone. Maybe, just maybe, they could make it through this together. They walked in silence for a while, their footsteps echoing on the cracked pavement, the oppressive quiet of the city weighing heavily on them. The sun was starting to dip lower in the sky, casting long shadows that made the once familiar streets feel even more alien. Elena glanced over at Caleb, who was scanning their surroundings with sharp, wary eyes. "So, where were you when it all happened?" Elena asked, her voice breaking the quiet between them. She needed to know more about this man, even though a small part of her still didn't fully trust him. But they were in this together now, whether they liked it or not. He hesitated before answering, his lips pressed into a tight line. I was in my apartment. Just a normal day. The news was all over about a flu outbreak, some virus going around. Didn't think much of it. Then one day, people started getting sick, and then it all just spiraled. I saw people changing, and then the streets were empty. No warnings, no preparation. He paused, his voice lowering, like the memory was too heavy to carry. I lost contact with my family right away. I tried looking for them, but I never found anyone. Elena's heart ached for him. She understood the loss, the confusion of waking up in a world where everything familiar was gone. I lost everyone too, she said quietly, her eyes focused on the path ahead. I was with my sister when it all started, but I couldn't save her. The zombies, they were too fast. Too many. Caleb nodded in understanding, but didn't say anything more. His face was a hard mask of grief and survival, but there was a flicker in his eyes, something that told Elena he still held on to the faintest spark of hope, even if he didn't show it. Do you ever think we're being watched? Elena asked after a pause. I mean, those messages, are you the last one left? I keep hearing it in my head. Caleb's eyes flicked to hers, and for a brief moment, she saw the same unease in him that she felt. Yeah. I think about it. It's too strange, don't you think? It's like someone knows we're out here, but how? Who? Elena's stomach twisted. It had been a question that plagued her since the messages started. How could anyone be tracking them? Was it the government? Someone still holding out in a safe zone? Or, something worse? The street they walked down turned into a winding alley, the shadows growing deeper as the light faded. Elena's senses were heightened, her eyes darting around the darkening corners, ears straining to catch any movement. She hated the feeling of being watched, of not knowing what dangers could be lurking just beyond her sight. Let's stop here for a moment, Caleb suggested, his voice low. He gestured to a rundown building ahead, an old coffee shop with broken windows. We can rest for a bit. We'll need to plan where to go next. Elena nodded in agreement, relieved to take a short break from the unease of walking for hours. They entered the shop cautiously, checking each corner before letting their guard down. Caleb sat at one of the tables, slumping into the chair with a deep sigh. Elena followed suit, her body aching from the tension of constantly being on alert. She scanned the room. Broken furniture lay scattered across the floor, empty shelves that once held coffee mugs and supplies now bare. There was a strange stillness to it, as if even the decay had stopped, frozen in time. The absence of life was overwhelming, suffocating. Do you think it's safe to stay here? Elena asked after a long pause, her eyes lingering on the shattered windows. Caleb was staring out the window, his gaze distant. He seemed lost in thought. For now, he muttered. It's as safe as anywhere else, I guess. But we need to keep moving soon. We can't stay in one place too long. The silence stretched between them again, only broken by the soft hum of wind outside. Elena felt a heavy weight settle in her chest, a mixture of exhaustion and the nagging fear that whatever lay beyond the horizon would only get worse. But they couldn't stop. Not yet. Suddenly, Elena's eyes caught something on the table, a small piece of paper, wedged between the cracked wooden surface. Curious, she picked it up and unfolded it, the faint markings of a hastily written note visible in the dim light. I found them. The messages are real. They know we're here. But we need to move fast. They're getting closer. Her heart raced. The words burned into her mind. They're getting closer. Caleb, look at this, she whispered, holding out the note. He took it, his brow furrowing as he read the cryptic message. Who wrote this? And who are they talking about? Elena's pulse quickened. I don't know, but it feels like someone's been tracking us, like they've been following our every move. I think this proves it. Whoever's sending the messages, they're watching us. Caleb stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "We need to go," he said, his voice now tight with urgency. "Whoever wrote this, whoever's watching us, they could be closer than we think." Elena's heart dropped as she realized the truth. The city wasn't empty. There were more people, people who had seen them, followed them, and now knew exactly where they were. Her pulse raced as they both hurried to the door, their minds racing with possibilities. They weren't alone anymore. The stakes had just been raised. Whatever was out there, whoever was sending the messages, it wasn't just watching them anymore. It was closing in. And Elena had no idea whether they were friend or foe. Elena's heart was pounding as she and Caleb stepped back into the street, the cool evening air rushing past them. The city, once filled with bustling life, now felt like an ancient ruin, a shell of what it used to be. But tonight, it wasn't just the silence that felt oppressive. It was the knowledge that someone, or something, was watching them, tracking their every move. Caleb's hand was on the hilt of a makeshift weapon he'd picked up, a rusty metal pipe. Elena felt the weight of her own fear settle deep in her bones. The note they'd found at the coffee shop, the ominous message about someone getting closer, was like a cold hand tightening around her throat. "We need to move," Caleb muttered under his breath. His eyes were darting around, his senses clearly on edge. Elena nodded quickly, but her mind was spinning. Who was watching them? What did they want? And most importantly, how long before the people, or things, who were hunting them caught up? The streets seemed quieter than usual, but the silence felt wrong. They weren't alone. Elena could feel it in the way the air around them was still, the way the shadows seemed to stretch longer than they should. Every rustle of wind, every distant sound made her heart skip a beat. "Stay close," Caleb warned, taking the lead as they began to move again. Elena followed without question, her eyes scanning the abandoned city for any signs of movement. They hadn't walked far when a loud crash echoed from somewhere behind them. Elena froze, her breath catching in her throat. "What was that?" she whispered, her eyes wide with alarm. Caleb didn't answer. He simply reached down, grabbing her arm and pulling her into a narrow alley, pressing them both against the cold brick wall. His grip was tight, almost desperate. Elena's mind raced. She hadn't heard anything before the crash, but now that the noise had broken the silence, it felt like everything was coming apart. She strained her ears, listening for any other signs of life, or death. The world felt too quiet again, too still. Suddenly, a figure appeared at the far end of the alley. Elena's breath caught in her chest. It was a person, or at least, it looked like one. They moved in jerky, unnatural motions, stumbling forward like they were unfamiliar with their own body. Elena felt the unmistakable sense of dread claw at her insides. It wasn't a person. It was one of them, a zombie. But there was something different about this one. It wasn't as decomposed as the others she'd seen, and it seemed to be moving with more intent. The figure paused, sniffing the air as if trying to catch a scent. Elena's stomach turned, and she held her breath, praying it wouldn't smell them. But the zombie didn't seem to notice them. Instead, it shuffled past, its eyes glazed over, its mouth slightly open as if it were searching for something. The moment it was out of sight, Elena exhaled sharply. She could feel her pulse hammering in her chest. She glanced at Caleb, who was still holding her arm, his eyes wide with a mix of fear and disbelief. "What the hell was that?" Elena whispered, her voice trembling. Caleb didn't reply immediately. He was staring after the creature, his brow furrowed, lost in thought. "That didn't look like the others," he muttered, more to himself than to Elena. "It's faster. More aware." Elena's thoughts spiraled. She'd seen plenty of zombies since the outbreak, but this one felt different. Like it had evolved, adapted. She shook her head, trying to push the thought away. No, that couldn't be right. It was just another infected person, nothing more. "We need to get out of here," Caleb said urgently, breaking her from her thoughts. "That thing wasn't alone. And if it's moving like that, we're not safe here." He didn't need to tell her twice. They turned and began moving again, staying close to the walls, moving quickly but quietly through the narrow alleyways. Elena's thoughts raced, but they kept her feet moving, kept her in the present moment. Caleb led them through the city, taking turns without speaking, his eyes constantly scanning the streets for any signs of danger. Elena followed closely behind, her breath shallow, her pulse hammering in her throat. The fear of being watched, of being followed, gripped her with every step. After what felt like hours, they arrived at an old building, an office complex with boarded-up windows and an entrance that seemed to be used for storage. Caleb pushed open the door cautiously, and they stepped inside, the familiar scent of dust and decay filling the air. They moved quickly through the halls, looking for a place to rest. "Here," Caleb said, pointing to a small storage room off to the side. "We can hold up here for the night." Elena nodded and followed him inside, but as she looked around, something caught her eye. On the wall, scratched into the paint, was a message, one that looked eerily similar to the ones she had been receiving. The words were jagged, almost as if written in desperation. "You are not alone. They are watching. Don't trust anyone." Elena's heart stopped. "They're already here," Caleb said quietly, staring at the message. "They've been watching us for longer than we thought." A cold chill ran through Elena's spine. They had been right all along. There was something out there, something that was tracking them, hunting them. She wasn't sure if it was human or something else, but she knew one thing for certain: it wasn't good. Caleb's voice cut through her thoughts, low and steady. "We're not safe here. But we need to figure out who's behind this. We can't keep running forever." Elena nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. They weren't just running from the infected anymore. They were running from something far worse. The night stretched on, and the tension in the small storage room was suffocating. Elena's thoughts were racing, her mind unable to quiet the nagging fear that had been building ever since they'd discovered the message on the wall. "They are watching. Don't trust anyone." It felt like a warning, but also a declaration. Whoever, or whatever, was behind the messages wasn't playing games. They were drawing them into something much bigger than just surviving zombies. Elena sat in the corner, her back pressed against the cold wall as she tried to catch her breath. Caleb was pacing back and forth, his hand gripping the metal pipe tighter with every step. He looked like a man on the edge of breaking, but he wasn't about to show it. "They're hunting us," Caleb muttered under his breath, barely audible. "Whoever's behind those messages, they know too much. They know we're alive." Elena swallowed hard, nodding. The realization settled like a stone in her stomach. They weren't just surviving a world overrun by the infected anymore, they were being hunted by someone or something that had been keeping a very close eye on them. "I don't get it," she whispered, her voice shaky. "If they're tracking us, why not just come after us directly? Why all the games? Why leave cryptic messages? Why make us wait?" Caleb stopped pacing, his eyes meeting hers. He was looking at her as if he were trying to figure out the answer to the same question. But the truth was, neither of them had any idea. "I don't know," he said, rubbing his face in frustration. "But something's wrong. All these messages, it's like we're not meant to be alone. Someone's orchestrating this, pushing us towards something. But what?" Elena couldn't shake the feeling that they were being led, like pieces on a chessboard, forced into a game they didn't understand. She stood up, pacing alongside Caleb, trying to make sense of everything. The world felt off-kilter, like a dream that didn't quite make sense, where the rules were always changing. The walls of the storage room were closing in around them, and despite the fact they were technically safer than they had been outside, the sense of dread only seemed to grow stronger. "I think we need to find the source," Elena said, the words spilling out before she had fully processed them. "Whoever's sending the messages, they're the key to all of this. We need to confront them, find out what they want." Caleb's eyes flickered with a mixture of caution and skepticism. "You don't know who, or what, they are. You don't even know if they're human. They could be something else." The idea of confronting whoever, or whatever, was behind this made Elena's stomach twist with anxiety. But what choice did they have? They couldn't keep running forever, hiding in small, dark corners of the city. The walls were closing in, and soon they wouldn't have a place left to hide. I'm willing to take that chance, Elena said firmly, though her voice trembled slightly. Because whatever this is, I'm done running. We need answers. Caleb let out a long breath, clearly debating it in his mind. Then, after what seemed like an eternity, he nodded slowly. All right. But we go together. No one goes alone. Elena felt a small sense of relief, knowing they were still in this together. For better or worse, they were now tied to the same fate. She couldn't help but feel a flicker of hope, despite the overwhelming fear that threatened to swallow her whole. Maybe, just maybe, finding the source of the messages would give them the answers they desperately needed. They moved quickly, gathering what little supplies they had left. The city around them was eerily quiet again, the streets barren, as if everything were holding its breath. Caleb kept a firm grip on his weapon, his eyes scanning every shadow, every flicker of movement in the darkened cityscape. Elena stayed close, her senses heightened, her mind racing with all the possibilities. Where were they supposed to go? Who was sending the messages, and what did they want from them? The air seemed to grow thicker as they made their way through the streets, moving as silently as possible. They had no plan, no clear path ahead, but they both knew that finding the source of the messages was the only way forward. It was the only thing that made sense now. After an hour of walking through the dark streets, they came upon a strange, dilapidated building that stood out among the rest. It was taller than the surrounding structures, its windows dark, the glass shattered. But there was something different about this building. It had been fortified. Metal grates covered the doors and windows, and there were signs of recent activity around the perimeter. This is it, Caleb said quietly, his voice filled with uncertainty. This is where they've been hiding. The people behind the messages. The ones watching us. Elena felt a chill run down her spine. She wasn't sure how she knew, but she could feel it in her bones. This was the place. The answers were inside. But as they approached the door, a low, almost imperceptible hum filled the air, like the sound of machinery coming to life. Elena froze. Something was happening, something she couldn't quite understand. But she knew one thing for sure. Whatever was inside this building wasn't just watching them anymore. It was ready for them. Caleb gave her a look, his expression set with determination. Ready? Elena took a deep breath, her nerves on edge but her resolve hardening. This was it. No more running. No more hiding. I'm ready, she said, though her voice was barely a whisper. Together, they stepped into the building, not knowing what waited for them inside, but knowing that they had no choice but to face whatever lay ahead. The game had changed, and now, they were the ones who had to make the first move. The door creaked as Caleb pushed it open, the sound sharp in the oppressive silence of the building. Elena's heart was in her throat, the weight of the moment pressing down on her chest. They stepped into the dimly lit interior, their eyes adjusting to the faint light filtering in from cracked overhead lamps. The room was vast, an abandoned research facility, its walls lined with old, rusted equipment, some still humming faintly with life. The air smelled stale, tinged with a metallic scent, as if the place had been locked away for years. But there was no time to marvel at the decaying surroundings. Every inch of Elena's body was on alert. The hum of the machinery seemed to grow louder, vibrating the air with a strange, unnatural energy. She glanced at Caleb, whose grip on the metal pipe had tightened, his face taut with tension. Stay close, he whispered, his voice low but urgent. Elena nodded, her pulse quickening with each step. They moved deeper into the building, their footsteps muffled on the concrete floor. As they turned a corner, they came upon a row of large, reinforced doors. Each one was sealed tight, labeled with faded, illegible markings. Which one? Elena asked, her voice barely audible. Caleb stepped forward, inspecting the doors carefully. His eyes narrowed, then he pointed to the farthest one. It was the only one that wasn't entirely sealed. It had a small, cracked opening, just enough for them to slip through. That one, he said. It's the only one that looks like it's been used. They approached cautiously, the silence of the building broken only by the low hum of the machines. Caleb grabbed the handle, twisting it slowly. The door groaned as it opened, revealing a large, dimly lit room. Inside, the walls were covered in monitors, all displaying static, but the screens flickered every few seconds, revealing fleeting images of the city outside, empty streets, deserted buildings, and movement. A figure stood in the center of the room. It was a person, or at least, it looked like one. But there was something wrong. The figure was tall, gaunt, and dressed in a long, dark coat, their face obscured by a hood. The hum of the machinery intensified as they turned toward the intruders, their movements unnaturally smooth, like a predator anticipating its prey. Caleb's grip tightened on his weapon, but Elena didn't reach for hers. She was frozen, her body rigid with a combination of fear and curiosity. "You've been watching us," Elena said, her voice trembling despite her best efforts to sound confident. The figure didn't speak at first, simply standing there, watching them. Then, as if considering their presence, the figure finally spoke, their voice cold and mechanical. "I've been waiting for you." Elena's breath caught in her chest. "Waiting? For what? Who are you?" The figure tilted its head, as if intrigued by her question. "I am neither human nor monster. I am a creation of the last remnants of mankind's desire to control. And you are the key." "Key?" Caleb repeated, his voice edged with confusion and suspicion. "The key to what?" The figure's lips curled into a faint, almost amused smile. "The world you know is dying. The infection, the zombies, they are the result of mankind's ambition to play God. They thought they could control nature, but they failed. I was designed to correct their mistakes." Elena's mind reeled. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It wasn't even about the infected. It was about something much larger. Something far more sinister. Correct their mistakes? Elena echoed. "What does that mean? What are you talking about?" "The virus," the figure said, stepping closer. "It wasn't an accident. It was an experiment, a test. The endgame was never to kill. It was to evolve. To create a new form of life. The infected, the zombies, they're only a stepping stone. They were meant to adapt, to grow stronger, faster. And now, they are closer to their purpose than ever." Elena took a step back, her mind reeling with the implications. This wasn't just about survival. It was about a larger plan, one that had been set in motion long before the outbreak. "And what does that have to do with us?" Caleb asked, his voice a low growl of anger. "What do you want with us?" "You," the figure said, their voice almost gentle now, "are the last survivors. The final test. If you can survive this, if you can face the new world that's coming, then you will prove that humanity still has a chance. But if you fail, well, you will become part of the new order. Just like everyone else." Elena's heart pounded in her chest. This wasn't just about surviving zombies or being hunted. It was about being part of a much larger, more terrifying game. "And you're the one pulling the strings?" Elena demanded, her voice rising with the weight of the revelation. "You've been watching us, guiding us here, making us think we were alone, when all along, it was you?" The figure nodded, their face unreadable beneath the hood. "Yes. I control the messages, the ones you've been receiving. I've been shaping your path, pushing you to this moment. To make you understand the truth." Caleb stepped forward, his voice sharp. "And if we don't want to play your game? What then?" The figure's smile faded, replaced by a cold, calculating gaze. "Then you will be lost. The world has already moved on. There is no place for weakness. No place for failure." Elena felt a chill crawl down her spine. The figure wasn't just a survivor. They were the architect of everything that had happened, the mastermind behind the chaos, and they were using them, as pawns in a game they couldn't understand. "Then we have a choice," Elena said, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside her. "We fight. We survive. And we take control back." The figure's expression remained unreadable, but they nodded slowly. "Yes. That is your choice. Elena glanced at Caleb, her resolve hardening. They might be in over their heads, but they wouldn't be pawns anymore. They would take control. No matter what it took. The figure turned and walked toward a nearby console, the hum of the machines growing louder. Make your decision quickly. The world is already changing. With a final glance at each other, Elena and Caleb turned to face the unknown, ready to confront whatever came next in a world that was no longer theirs to control, but one they would fight to reclaim. The game had truly begun.